Hey guys, Trevor Chikuti here from SpineWise. If you're feeling a little bit run down, maybe you wake up in the morning feeling stiff and achy, not feeling free first thing in the morning, and maybe don't recover very well from activity and you're starting to feel a little bit old as you start moving on with age, then this video is for you. So today we're going to start talking about chronic versus acute inflammation, because there is a difference. Inflammation can be good and inflammation can be bad. And there are times we want to get rid of it and times that it's not so important to get rid of it as well. And there's a little bit of confusion about what that is, how it works, and potentially the effect it has on your future as well. So let's start by just talking briefly about inflammation, what inflammation is. Because inflammation is really the ability to bring cells into the area that's damaged to allow for healing and regeneration to occur. Now, whilst this sounds like a very simple thing, and this is a very, like everyone does this, it's not always that easy to do, and there's a lot of different things that influence it, and we'll cover that in a little bit more detail later on. But when we're talking about inflammation, really we have two types. One is acute. This is what happens after you've done an injury. So when you first get injured, you roll your ankle or you tear a muscle, something like that, that inflammation that you get and that sensitivity you get in that area, this is acute inflammation. And acute inflammation is very beneficial for us. When we start talking about inflammation that is chronic, this inflammation that just keeps going and going and going without purpose, and this can actually be quite damaging for us. Let me explain. When we start talking about acute inflammation, really what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get cells to the area. We're trying to get these cells into the area that's been damaged in the hope of allowing for regeneration to occur. Okay, so we need these cells in there, otherwise we're just not going to heal. And this provides a healing effect, tissue regeneration, and a lot of the time this provides scarring to the area to make the area stronger than it previously was. So this whole process is beneficial and helpful in order to aid our recovery and our regeneration. This is very, very different than when we have chronic inflammation. So chronic really means a long term, beyond what it's needed, okay? So when we start talking about chronic inflammation, this really serves very little purpose. We no longer have tissue degeneration that we're trying to reduce. We're no longer trying to improve healing or anything like that. This is purely an inflammation that just won't dissipate, it won't disappear, and this provides problems for us. So it keeps cells in the area, and it sometimes even makes it systemic. It becomes everywhere, all over our system, and leads to tissue degeneration, breakdown, which eventually leads to degeneration and aging, which is a big, big problem for us. So this really is quite harmful to our system. This is something that we don't want to have. Okay, so how do we tell the difference between what is acute and what is chronic inflammation? Well, we can kind of talk about it in terms of time frames and things like that, but really what we're talking about is, does it serve a purpose? So if you've just injured your ankle or maybe damaged a shoulder or something like that, we need the inflammation for healing. When it becomes chronic though, this is when it doesn't really have a purpose. You're getting inflammation, but you haven't really damaged areas. And some of the key things that we notice with that, the first one is probably the most important one and the most common one, and that is you get stiff on waking. So when you get up in the morning, you stand up, you hop out of bed, and those first maybe half a dozen steps just feel stiff and achy, and then once you get moving, you free it up, the inflammation comes out, the joints loosen up, and you can then get going. This is a classic sign of chronic-based inflammation or systemic inflammation. We get sore after activity, an exaggerated soreness after we do some activity. So we go for a walk, we go for a run, and rather than just getting our maybe 24 to 48 hour delayed onset muscle soreness after that, we have muscle soreness that lasts for perhaps days or perhaps even weeks in some instances after that. And as we get the scarring and the degeneration that occurs with all this stuff, we end up getting a tight feeling or a progressive reduction in our range of motion. So we might find that our neck starts getting stiff and we don't have the movement in there that we once had, or our shoulder starts stiffening up and getting tight like we do with a frozen shoulder type feeling. And the result of this long term is degeneration, or in other words, aging. And that's the whole problem with chronic inflammation. Acute inflammation, good, has a purpose. Chronic inflammation, terrible, and these are the things that will create some issues for you. Okay, so I've got a whole lot of videos on this type of stuff. If you want to know more about that, please like our page, subscribe, turn on notifications. We're going to do a whole lot more information on chronic inflammation, how you can reverse it, coming up in the next series of vids. So follow us, stay tuned, and we'll tell you what you can do to actually help bring that down. If you have any questions in the meantime, or you're not too sure whether what you have is a good or a bad inflammation, just post up or message me. Happy to help out in any way we can. Catch you in the next vid. Bye for now.